I'm very pleased to pass the word now over to our speaker today, Victor Kipiani from Geocase. Please, Victor.
Thank you, Dr. Wambling. Thank you for your warm welcome and thank you for your generous introduction. I'm really very much delighted to present some of my points on the Georgia's path since regaining its independence. And of course, special thanks go to Russia and Caucasus Regional Research Platform at Malmö University. So thank you for having me. It's really a privilege and it's really a good opportunity as well. I was thinking in which way to make my presentation, and frankly speaking, although we call it presentation, but I would rather invite all of us to reflect rather than to preach, advocate, jumping to conclusions, etc., because 30 years, it's not a small span of time, but same time it's not as big sometimes to make a definitive conclusion on all the points, especially in the world which is upending our eyes, and we're chattering an unknown lands in terms of geopolitics, regional, geoeconomics, etc., nation building. And frankly speaking, I would rather I would not treat myself to speak, in a way as to have a sort of certainty in my views and my points. So therefore, I think that the reflections are well suited, for our discussions. And I also thought that how to structure my reflections, as I've said, and I would try to go along the following lines: Georgia's posture internationally, and Georgia's posture regionally, and the last but not least important section of my reflections, as I've said, would be domestic matters. And then I thought that dividing those domestic pillars into two sub-pillars, which is on political resilience of Georgian political system, and on the resilience and sustainability of Georgian economy. I think that all in all, this structure would hopefully give all of us, a good feedback for our follow-up thoughts and follow-up reflections. So let me start, please, with international posture, which is premised on both opportunities and challenges. I think that those challenges, I'm pretty sure those challenges are not new to any one of you. We're facing dramatic changes in the region. We're right on the eve of hopefully, I very much hope and fingers crossed that a major escalation would be avoided. But there are big question marks, and the reality is that we are placed in the center of those geopolitical gravitation, and therefore what we are to expect in the coming days would have direct, implicit bearing on Georgian matters, on Georgian political institutions, and Georgian resilience. But if you ask me, when we speak about Georgian foreign policy, what those priorities in foreign policy and international politics of Georgia are, I would rather say in a probably less legalese way and less diplomatic way, but more in a fictional manner, if you will. It's about getting closer to Europe and getting closer to Euro-Atlantic community. And when I'm saying getting closer, I'm picking up, those connotations very cautiously, because each of those paths, each of those ways could be implemented or should be implemented in a very responsible manner, and realizing that the process is always about a two-way street. It's not just moving from our side, it's also how the Europe and Euro-Atlantic community reacts to Georgia's matters, appreciates the challenges on our side and feels all the pain which we feel. And this is very important, and I would rather emphasize, because sometimes, when we speak about a success of Georgia's reforms and Georgia's aspirations, that success story is all inclusive. It's all about us. It's not just about Georgians making a success. It's also a litmus test, if you will, for the European community, how receptive they are, how perceptive they are, and how knowledgeable they are of the region, and especially of a small nation, which is Georgian nation, which is in a very volatile region, faced with many turbulences and many, equally, as I've said, opportunities and challenges. So therefore, I think, getting closer is the most, responsible manner on conveying my own interpretation of Georgian foreign policies. Same time, when we speak about the biggest challenge on both ways of the so-called getting closer, of course, it is the occupation. The occupation at this stage, remains the greatest challenge. And when we speak about the occupation, I would respectfully draw your attention to sometimes, to a very frequent misunderstanding which we Georgians come across when reading Western media, when reading articles by Western pundits and scholars. The mistake and the misunderstanding is about speaking about ethnic politics in Georgia and ethnic conflicts. I should necessarily point out that, of course, Georgian Abkhasian and Georgian Ossetian conflicts, by definition, they have all the characteristics of the ethnic conflicts, but essentially, profoundly, conceptually, it's not about ethnopolitics, but it's about geopolitics. Because eruption of those conflicts in Georgia was a direct response, and is continuing to be direct response, destructive response to Georgia's foreign policy objectives. So this is very important for us, because when we speak about ethnic conflicts, of course, again, with all my appreciation for the ethnicity of those conflicts, we're sort of, recalibrating the essence of the problems in a wrong way. This is my perception and my suggestion and my kind sort of, respectful advice. Since I've mentioned getting closer, of course, we realize that on that way, being a reliable partner is very important. And that reliability requires from us an effective foreign policy and effective domestic policy. Again, when we speak about effective Georgian foreign policy, effectiveness also, poses a big question mark. What are the limits of those effectiveness? And where those limits are, when stepping beyond those limits, the situation could spiral out, and we could come across, on extra challenges, extra pressure, and extra troubles. So I think that effectiveness and responsibility of handling those foreign policy is very much in line with each other. On the way of our integration with Euro-Atlantic community, I should necessarily sum up very quickly those very important platforms or instruments which Georgia enjoys and possesses. Those are, in the first instance, Georgia's NATO cooperation. As most of you know, Georgia is an active contributor to the NATO-led order and peacekeeping operations. This is very important. We're not just a consumer of Euro-Atlantic order, and this is something which I want to emphasize very very strongly as a Georgia. We're not consuming the Euro-Atlantic water, but we're contributing to Euro-Atlantic water. And sometimes we're contributing beyond the limits of our capabilities and resources. So that is very important for us to note. It is also very important to note that our cooperation with NATO is not just about peace-leading operation or peacekeeping operation. It's about a changing reality of in a Georgian defense and defense-related industries. And those leverages are, in the first place, it's a NATO Georgian Commission, which oversees implementation of reforms in Georgian security and defense. It's also Georgia getting a status of the Enhanced Opportunities Partner since 2014. And we all very much look forward to NATO 2030 strategic vision, which should focus more intensively on the role and on the meaning of the Black Sea in the overall context of the Eurasian security. So I think, this is the path in front of us, and we all, our NATO partners and Georgians should, tackle this mission and that agenda in a most appropriate way. The second platform, or the second leverage, it's about Georgia and European Union. Again, to sum up, some basic facts which we all know, but for the sake of good order, we should necessarily point out to them. And those key pillars of the partnership, of Georgia's partnership with the European Union, are association agreements and deep, comprehensive and free trade agreements. Those are, if I can say, the constitutional documents of Georgia's getting closer to Europe, as I've said at the very beginning of my sort of a reflexive presentation. Also, I should necessarily mention that we've joined various other important legal documents, such as European Energy Community Treaty. And as you could appreciate, being in the region of the small land of patch of land between the Black Sea and the Caspian region, but the patch of land which positions itself with with a number of important infrastructure and energy cross-border projects. Joining Energy Community Treaty has been an important step in harmonizing rules of game on a Georgian side with internationally recognized norms and standards. It's also about visa-free regime, and it's also about Eastern Partnership. But I would stop, for a second on Eastern Partnership, with your permission. With appreciation of the controversy on my side, but for the sake of honesty in my reflections, I should necessarily say that although welcoming the Eastern Partnership, we should admit that this combination seems to me a bit non-organic, if you will, because if you recall that 6 nations, member nations of the Eastern Partnership, although Belarus has suspended relatively recently its membership, are Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. You would recognize instantaneously that the frequency and ambitions of all those 6 nations are different, and they pursue different speed, the frequency in terms of approximating with Europe. And therefore, when recently the so-called associated trio has been set up, with Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia being members of the trio, I personally welcomed, that step as a more rightful, more sound, and more pragmatic, because it again, with all my respect to all the benefits of the Eastern Partnership, I think that's a clear division between Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia on one side, and Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus on another side are so clear that they nearly become indisputable. So I think, this is a very positive step, and I very much hope that setting up an associated trio would speed up to the largest extent possible, integrating with the political Europe. Last but not least, are very ambitious, I recognize, very ambitious statement by Georgian politicians to officially submit Euro membership application in 2024. Just setting aside, how well-founded, that statement is. And I very much appreciate all the pros and cons. Still, I personally welcome, because any incentive to be more focused on making the Georgian political system as sound as possible, I think is the step in the right direction. So regardless whether that application would be filed or not, and definitely, I have nothing against, that application, at least, it would have an immediate benefit of having an extra pressure, an extra healthy pressure on Georgian politics, at least, fingers crossed. And I think that statement be welcomed, from very pragmatic and very rational standpoint. And the last intervention, the last sort of, the subsection in my international coverage, it's about Georgia's United States relationships. And I should single out United States because the United States has been a stronger supporter for Georgian sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity for all those 30 years. And honestly, on my personal level, if not that support and not that assistance in many possible respects, it would be very hard to imagine, even to imagine where we would be at this point and this stage of the history. And when we speak about the special meaning and strategic meaning of our partnership with the United States, it's about various fundamental legal acts of upon which that partnership is hinged. It's a Georgia Support Act, Consolidated Appropriation Act, and also it's about the so-called Constitution of Georgia United States Strategic Partnership. It's the Strategic Charter, Strategic Cooperation Charter. So I think that those issues were in relation to sort of giving you a feeling of the way we have covered, and of the issues, of the challenges, and of the opportunities we would be facing from now on. I would stop for a while on regional posture, and this is very important. South Caucasus and the modern structure of relationships between the countries of the South Caucasus and various regional actors, those relations have really evolved over the years, and they have progressed from the bilateral relations to a more complex and multi-layered system. And many pundits and politicians, and I agree with them, see the parallels as well between regional context of the regional politics, I would say, and the emerging new world order. And I personally very much concur and share those observations. It is also important to say that very basic, modest, and honest view when we give an analysis about the South Caucasus compels me to say that the importance of order and stability in the South Caucasus goes beyond the region itself, and that's importance, that the Caucasus is much bigger than just the Caucasian geography. It's because of the fact that the Caucasian diversity it's truly created of a system picture of the Eurasian security and Eurasian multicultural system. So that is also very important. I would also say that when we speak about the Caucasus, it's really painful to realize that still there is not enough understanding and knowledge on the Western side about the regional politics. And that ambivalence, to pick up, this word diplomatically and very cautiously, that ambivalence has been also introduced in this confrontation between the East and the West, the confrontation which we see these days on the Ukrainian example, especially with regard to specific countries. When those countries are named as buffer states, geopolitical in no man's lands, or other very amorphous phrase at least. And I think, those connotations, that ambiguity is precisely because of not having enough understanding, as I've said, among Western politicians and Western political institutions. So this is the voice by a Georgian that a deeper insight and deeper understanding and deeper study of all the implications of regional politics and regional politics in the South Caucasus is the must to understand the wider picture of the Greater Black Sea and the wider picture of the Eurasian security. I already mentioned all the perils, I would say, and all the danger of the so-called Georgian ethnic conflicts, such as Georgianification and Georgianization. And once again, my respectful appeal to my colleagues, would be to think twice before they name those conflicts as a purely ethnic conflicts. So all in all, of course, the regional politics of the South Caucasus, it's a big topic. It's a massively big topic, and my wishful thinking, if you will, at the end, by concluding, my sort of reflections on the South Caucasus, is that I very much hope that one nice day, the region, which is these days, unfortunately, is synonymous with war, conflict, and instability, should and would turn into the one synonymous with peace, mutual understanding, and development instead. And when, this is not just the phrase, of course, this phrase has a very specific meaning. Because as I've said, we're facing new order in the South Caucasus, and that new order has especially been prompted by the aftermath of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. And let me just please remind you very briefly what is the landscape, security and geopolitical landscape in the region. We have Turkey, which got quite a sizable seat, I would say, and meaningful seat at the regional, the table of regional politics. And that say and that role of Turkey has especially been increased, probably some of you know, by very intensive cooperation and partnership with Azerbaijan. And the recent step, by increasing that cooperation has been about signing the so-called Shusha Declaration, which is about defense and security cooperation between Azerbaijan and Turkey. And all of a sudden, probably not all of a sudden, but still, we received a formerly NATO member in the geography which Russia is treating and continuing to treat as its exclusive sphere of influence. So I think that's in many years to follow, the regional geopolitics would be very much under the impacts of the interaction of those two powers, Russian Federation on one side, which for the last 100 years has been indisputable leader, geopolitical leader in the region, And this time, in the aftermath of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, we have a Turkey as, I would not be saying, an equally important player, but the player which has increased its leverage and increased its regional say considerably. The aftermath of the Second Karabakh War has also resulted into not diminishing the Russian role, but emphasizing the Russian role in the region. And that emphasis has been reflected in the increase of military presence. As you know, Azerbaijan has been the only the ex-Soviet republic with the conflict in its own territory, where Russian peacekeepers were not present. And one of the very concrete and substantial reflections and results of the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, that the Russian troops under the peacekeeping mandates are nowadays stationed in Azerbaijan. Of course, it changes the dynamics of the region considerably, because we Georgians, being under the occupation, are facing these days, considerable Russian military presence, not just in Armenia, but in Azerbaijan as well. So it has direct impact on the Georgian security politics. We should expect that probably, again, arguably for some, that Armenia's defeats in the Second Karabakh War could reduce its outreach to the West. And last but not least, what I forgot about this bromance of Turkey and Russia, and this is really very important, that the marriage for convenience of Turkey and Russian Federation in the region is incentivized and driven by the ambitious by Turkey and Russia to squeeze out the West from the region. And this is very important, and that takes me to the big question mark. Where is the West in the region, and where will the West remain, continue to be present in the region in the most meaningful and powerful presence? This is the biggest issue, especially for us, for Georgians, because, as you know, we're the only country which has proclaimed officially that our integration with Europe, our integration with Euro-Atlantic community is the key foreign policy objective. So therefore, the entrenchments or selective engagements or many other, nice names which we could find abundantly in Western media and politics, whereby the Western politicians are trying to disguise, I would not be saying, negligence, of course, I'm not speaking about negligence, but at least, some resistance to actively pursue the regional politics in the South Caucasus. Of course, it's very much on our agenda, and it's very much on our concern. So we look forward that in the years to come, that presence would become more powerful, more meaningful, and more substantial. But this is the big issue, and I appreciate that touching on all the implications of that issue in course of these discussions is beyond the limits. So I would rather conclude at this point, when speaking about Georgia's international posture and Georgia's regional posture. Oh, by the way, when we speak about the Georgia's regional posture, you probably have heard about the so-called platform of 3+3, which is considered, by Georgia, by official Tbilisi, very cautiously, which, as it was said, stated by the Georgia's Foreign Office, it's a sort of, disguised attempts by Russia, Turkey, and Iran to get a better domination and more meaningful domination over the region. We said that we are not in a position to join that platform. We're not ready and we're not willing to join that platform just because of the reason, and I think, that reason is more than enough, that we cannot sit next to Russian Federation and speak about the peace and stability when Georgian territories are remaining under the Russian occupation. So it would be extremely unacceptable, and therefore Georgians have set forth, their own initiative about accomplishing stability and order. It's called the Peaceful Neighborhood Peaceful Initiative, and it's also about bringing Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia over those issues which can unite us, economy-wise or policy-wise. So we'll see. At least, those are the sort of, competing regional initiatives, and I was bound, to mention those regional initiatives because the sustainability of each of those initiatives would have a critical say in the context of regional landscape. Next destination points in my reflections is about Georgian political system, and I think this is the part of our discussions which are, as I anticipate, are expected, with sort of, with special interest. Some of my conclusions, I realize, would not be shared by the whole audience, but still, let me please name a few of challenges which are typical to Georgia, and which are typical to not just Georgia, but typical to transition economies, transition countries, and these days, which are also becoming typical to the developed democracies as well. And the curiosity of my statement that when we speak about Georgia's getting closer to Europe, unfortunately, it's not just about positive agenda, but it's also about negative agenda when we have to work out a common response and recipe how to deal with challenges such as domestic extremism, polarization, impatience towards hearing and accepting different opinion, and just hearing each other and listening to each other and accepting and agreeing with each other. So I think therefore this I would be discussing the Georgian challenges, but those are not just Georgian challenges by definition, but these are the challenges which we all share to the varying extent. But still, since this webinar is about Georgia, I should necessarily say that the insufficiency of political culture and standards when winner takes all, this is one of the sort of, the negative sides of the Georgian politics. Non-inclusivity, which is also very typical. Zero-sum game, which probably, also relates to the harmful principle of when the winner takes all. Of course, those have very direct, profound, and, if you will, the philosophical impact on the quality of Georgian political life. And if you also take into account of the last year's low turnout in Georgian elections, what is obvious to me that there is a quest among Georgian voters for new political camps, for new political forces and new political leaders. And when I'm saying new, it's not just about faces, it's about quality, it's about standards, it's about criteria. And if I may say, probably not very modestly, that for the last years, when we at Geocase, we advocate for improving quality of Georgian political life, you would never ever come across specific individuals or names, because we're speaking about standards, we're speaking about criteria, we're speaking about approaches, and that is very important because on another side, another downside of Georgian politics that it became too much personified. And personified politics, I think, it's that vicious cycle, which has to be broken down, for once and ever. These days, especially in Georgian media, you would also hear the complaints about lack of responsible opposition. And lack of responsible opposition, it's not just detrimental for the authorities, but it's also detrimental and reputational damaging for the country. It's also about an absence of compromise and concessions, as well as about politicized and radicalized media. And this is the point, which probably does not single out Georgian media, but that's an overall picture, global picture, which we see nearly everywhere in the world. And the last but not least, and I appreciate, this would be very arguable point, quite a toxic civic sector. And when I speak, about civic sector, I would appreciate and would welcome, non-governmental organizations to become more depoliticized, to be more disconnected from political camps, and to handle their activities more responsibly, taking into account not just domestic challenges, but external risks as well. I'm mindful of time, but I think that I should finish, in 15 minutes, and then we could have time for Q&A. So a few other points, if I may. I would stop, on the elections, and I would stop on the judiciary, because again, I appreciate that those are the topics which where you would welcome my assessments and my views. So Georgian elections. The latest major reforms in Georgian electoral system was made last year, and that reform has been phrased as with enough level, a degree of cooperation of the ruling party and several opposition parties, not all, I should admit, but several opposition parties, but at least, that being something, which has been emphasized in various conclusions and assessments by international bodies. But what remains as a challenge are frequent amendments to the elections laws, and those frequent elections, they definitely damaging integrity of the election culture and are not helpful for setting up patterns for the sustainability of that culture. So the key recommendation by international bodies is about making the holistic process, but not micromanaging it from one political cycle to another political cycle. So that is very important. Also very important when I mentioned that although the electoral reform was has provided for wider participation of Georgian political spectrum, still it was not all inclusive, and therefore giving the sense of the ownership to all political parties, for any further or any future changes in the elections law would be extremely important. Several flaws or errors which still have to be addressed when reforming Georgian electoral system are about providing with high credentials to non-partisan members of Central Electoral Commission, and ensuring diverse membership and merit-based process. This is very important. Also, it is very important that the laws should provide for clear criteria for recounts and annulments. Next major issue which we should tackle on our side is about timely handling election disputes, including submissions, adjudication formalities, etc., etc. One of those issues which has been argued by the opposition was about equal population size for single mandate electoral districts. And also it's about regulatory for new voting technologies. Probably this is one of the reasons which led to sort of, not sufficiently sustainable level of political pluralism in Georgia. Although I should say that if you look at the Georgian parliaments, it looks like as a dynamic multi-party system, and it is also important to note that by Georgian laws, it's quite easy in terms of legalese and formalities to set up a political party and operate it without major obstacles. But on another side, and this is the issue which I would raise from my side, that the low entry bar to the Georgian parliament, which is 1%, it provided for, although it provided small parties with good enough chances to get their seats in the parliament, but still it became the cause for political fragmentation and inability to form up viable coalitions. So I think that if and when speaking about future changes into the elections law, I think for the sake of sustainability of the political culture, that entry bar should be increased to a reasonable level. I think that we should be proud of that there are no legal restrictions on a gender basis, ethnic and religious minorities representations. More than that, at least one in every 4 candidates on a party list must be a woman. But regardless of those legal prescriptions, the reality is that although, as you know, we have a woman who became a president, women have won just 21 seats in these parliaments, and I think that this is something which has to be addressed. More equality in gender representation. I would go on with judiciary. And the recent wave of criticism when we speak about sound Georgian judiciary was caused by the wave of appointments of judges to the Supreme Court. With your permission, I would not go into many details, which are relevant to the process, but I would stop on few points, both positive points and negative points. And the positive points, which have been recognized by international bodies, are about electronic allocation of cases. It's about setting up an office of independent inspector at the High Council of Justice for judicial matters. It's about improving disciplinary proceedings and liability norms. It's about publishing the minutes of the High Court of Justice, and why I'm High Council of Justice, and why I'm speaking about High Council of Justice, because when I'll touch on the downsides and deficiencies of Georgian judiciary, those deficiencies primarily they relate to the High Council of Justice. Yes, the next probably positive the improvements on the Georgian judiciary, increasing number of judges in the Supreme Court up to 28, because we have a heavy backlog of cases, and that could help, to some extent. But as I've said, some challenges still remain, and those challenges that, shamefully enough, and Dr. Vamlik has mentioned my legal background. I'm practicing the law for more than 25 years. Shamefully enough, after April 2020, there is no access to court decisions electronically, although the law provides that decisions should be published and should be accessible by the wider audience. That's one point. The next point is about low access to public information in relation to the courts. Next point, it's about inconsistency in processing statistics about judiciary. And those are all the points which have been mentioned by international observers, but also been emphasized by Georgian non-governmental organizations. It is also about the process of the secret voting at the High Council of Justice, which presumably does not allow for merit-based appointments and elections, and obviously needs to be revisited as soon as possible. It has also been recommended that the majority of members of High Council of Justice be non-judges, which could ensure impartiality of the voting process. And the last, what we saw, as you remember, I mentioned the last wave of appointments to the Supreme Court, that the process became highly politicized, and the politics consummated, the gist of the process. It left very small room for discussions on merits. And therefore, I think for the honesty of our discussions, and as I've said, my legal background also compels me to state, that unless this situation would not change, in terms of merit-based appointments, we would be still relatively far away from having reliable judiciary. And when I'm speaking about judiciary, when I'm speaking about electoral system, may I remind, when we started about stating getting closer to Europe, and when I said that getting closer to Europe, it's about two prime objectives. It's about reliable foreign policy and reliable domestic policy. We, Georgia, as a soft power in the region, if there is any viable toolkits whereby we have to position ourselves, and we've been trying to position ourselves as a regional leader, is reflected in this sound political system. That is and will remain our business card, if you will, or geopolitical or geoeconomical card, something which is not just for the benefit of the Georgian audience, but which could have a ripple effect on the region as well. So therefore, I think that it's really very hard to overemphasize importance of judiciary. It's really very it's hardly possible to overemphasize importance of sound elections. And I would rather stop, when speaking about judiciary and elections here, because I would be anticipating questions from your side, and would also try to respond to your questions in an open-minded manner. Dr. Bamling, I thought to say a few words about the Georgian economy, as we have a quite ambitious topic of 30 years since we're gaining independence. So if I may have 5-7 minutes, then I could say a few words. If not, we can proceed to Q&A. What would you recommend, please?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you so far for this very sort of wide and very interesting expose of topics and challenges. I think it could be good to open up for questions now, and then we have this sort of a topic that we can return to, and we can see sort of how it goes with questions. And I suggest that we go to the Q&A session, and I will switch off the recording part, as I said.